Phumlani Josie, the author of Lessons from Past Heroes. It's great to be back on the show. I have a very interesting guest this week. I'm sure you do know him. He's one of the very famous libertarians in South Africa. He's been here on the show before since we started. Martin van Staden, he is the head of policy at the Free Market Foundation. Mr. van Staden, how are you, sir? Are you winning your
Thanks for having me, Phumlani. I'm doing great. How about you?
Good, good. Are you winning your battles against the leftists in South Africa? Do you think you're winning?
It's a tough battle. They have us outnumbered and in some cases outgunned, but we have the better arguments. We have the truth on our side. So eventual victory is guaranteed.
We do have the history on our side, and I think we will win too at some point. Now, what I wanted to talk to you about, Martin, at this point, is the issue of crime in South Africa, right? At very shocking levels of crime that we see in the country. And we are going to touch on as well on gun rights and gun ownership, and maybe hear your thoughts as to how do we tackle the issue of crime in South Africa. I have said to some people, Martin, that if there's only one thing that will make me leave South Africa, it's not the state of the economy, because I think I've tried by all means to equip myself, upskill myself, go to college, get experience. It wouldn't be the state of the social or of the economy, but the levels of crime and how it has affected me personally and many other people in South Africa who have had bad experience. How do you see this crime crisis in the country? What are the drivers here in your analysis, Martin, of this crime?
Yeah. So look, I think there's you could say three levels to this. I think there's the first level is a very superficial kind of thing that you see in our politics where all the politicians say, we just have to be tough on crime and we just need more police officers and so on. And then they also say, we have to fix the economy because poor people commit crime, and it's a very superficial analysis. Yeah. Then I would say the next level, and that is where the Free Market Foundation kind of operates with its Section 12 initiative, which is kind of focused on the fundamentals of dealing with crime, specifically of kind of dealing with the symptoms, kind of the outcomes of crime. And that is to say that we actually have to do some fundamental public policy reforms to enable people to defend themselves, to enable government to fight crime more effectively, really fundamental stuff. But then there is a third level as well. And this is not something that an organization like the Free Market Foundation or the government or a political party or anything can deal with. And this is a cultural issue. The idea that South Africa has kind of, we're a poor country, therefore it's normal for 86 people to be murdered every single day, or 136 rapes to occur every day, or 5 rapes every hour. We're poor, therefore that's what happens. No. South Africa is very, very far from the poorest country in the world. What we have is a fundamentally cultural problem, and that is why crime is normal. We have a bloodthirsty, depraved culture in this country around crime, and that is about how people are raised. That's about parents. That's about pastors. That's about community leaders. That's about grandparents, uncles. That is not a policy problem. That is not something that policy can solve. Policy might have caused that problem, but families and communities need to step in to solve that problem. There's only the Cape Flats, for example, can only be a war zone because the gangsters don't have mothers who tell them, "What are you doing, my son? Why are you doing this?" They don't have people that they can look up to, father figures, to sit them down and say, you cannot do this. That is why we have a crime crisis in this country, unfortunately, Phumlani. But where we operate, as I said, as the FMF, is kind of dealing with the consequences of it. And that's important because not everyone, you and I, don't commit these crimes. We actually have to be protected from these crimes. And there are things that can and should happen to enable that the current government, and I would include virtually every political party currently in government, is really not interested in. And that's really fundamental policy reform. in that space to deal with kind of crime as a second order thing rather than unfortunately solving it at the cultural level, which is a very long-term project that we're going to need communities and families to get involved in.
Yeah, you've mentioned something very important, and that is culture, right? And some people will attack you for this, right? This is a controversial statement you are making, that it could be a cultural issue. I just came back from Ghana, Martin. Last month, we had a very nice conference with wonderful people from different parts of the world, North America, Latin America, and Africa. Well, yeah, the Caribbean and Africa as well. And I had a lunch with a Ghanaian in Accra, a Ghanaian high school teacher, right? And when we spoke about his country and my country, he couldn't understand, Martin, why do we have so much violence in South Africa? Right, and this is a poorer country, Martin, by a standard of living, as an economy. It's a poorer economy in contrast, of course, to South Africa. He couldn't understand. And I looked at the homicide rate or intentional homicide rate. Ghana's one is about 2 per 100,000 people. What is South Africa's? South Africa's is about 45 per 100,000 people, 42, 43, 45, somewhere there, though, per 100,000 people. And that shocks many people. It's very, very shocking. And then a few years back, I was in Kenya as well and had lunch with a friend there. He also couldn't understand. And I looked at their data in terms of homicide rates. It's about 5 per 100,000 people, the homicide rate in Kenya. And compared to ours in the 40s per 100,000 people. And these are poorer countries. In Africa in general, many sub-Saharan African countries, you can't find this level of crime. Could it be that, I guess my point is that it could really be a cultural thing, because we are not as poor as those countries, and we don't have, and we have these levels of crime. Now, some people, and this is where I want you to jump in now, Martin. Some people say it's the levels of inequality in South Africa. That the Gini coefficient is very, very high. We have very, big gap between the rich and the poor. And those countries don't have they don't have our levels of inequality. How do you argue against that argument that inequality is is the cause of our serious crime problem?
Okay, yeah, I think that's right. That is something that a lot of people would say. And I would say, again, there is 3 levels to address that. I think the first thing to say, and this does tend to confuse people, but bear with me.
Yeah.
Inequality, the inequality issue is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we have activists in this country, and we've had them for many, many years, who go around into communities, into universities, onto television, onto radio, and they tell people that inequality is a problem. And lo and behold, it then becomes a political issue. And we've seen this all around the world. Poor people do not go to bed fretting about the fact that someone else has more wealth than they do. That is not something that naturally occurs. What does occur is that people want to live comfortably, they want to eat, they want to be able to send their kids to school, etc. That is what people worry about. They do not worry generally about other people's levels of wealth. That is not the problem. But as a downstream consequence of political activism, inequality has, through the activism, become a problem in South Africa. So that's the first point. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy where it has been made on the back of activism to be seen as a social problem.
Yeah.
The second point is it goes back to this thing that I just highlighted. We have very high levels of destitution in this country. That means that people's basic needs are not being fulfilled. We don't have starvation, etc. We've now both explained that we're not the poorest country in the world.
Yeah.
But people do not live comfortably. They do not go home and sit down on a couch and sigh contentedly about a busy day and now they're going to relax for the rest of the day. That is very rare in in South Africa. People do live from kind of hand to mouth. People do live from week to week on wages. Very little saving is going on, etc. People aren't able to send their kids to the best schools that they have in mind. People aren't able to get the best healthcare that they would prefer. So we do have high levels of destitution. That is a problem, and that is always conflated with inequality. This idea that, well, there are people out there who aren't suffering, and that is a problem. That is the problem. No, we need to be very careful about ensuring that we maintain that distinction between destitution, which is a real life phenomenon that you can see and measure and feel, and inequality, which I promise you is a 100% academic concern. It is something that academics like Karl Marx saw, and they thought about it, and they made a problem of it. And now many more academics in South Africa and around the world continue to make a problem issue of it, but it isn't. So that's the second point. And the third point, which brings it back to crime, is that if your perception as an individual is that other people have more than I do, and therefore I am going to go into their house or into the house of someone who might look like them, or who, or just some random person, my neighbor, and I will rape their 3-month-old baby and torture that baby to death, or I will cut up someone and dismember them and pour boiling hot water down their throats. If that is your reaction to so-called inequality, then again, Phumlani, it is a cultural problem. Fundamentally, it is a cultural problem, because that is not a way that a healthy culture reacts to a perceived problem like inequality. So even if we are to accept that it is the perception of inequality that triggers people to commit crime, that is still fundamentally a cultural issue, just given the kinds of crime we see in South Africa. So if South Africa had a large theft problem, let's say theft was the big thing. People go into grocery stores and they steal bags full of bread and apples, and then they run away, or they break into someone's house and they grab the wallet or they grab the television and they run away. Then I would say, okay, so clearly there's an economic issue here. Maybe it's about destitution, maybe it's about inequality, but that is not what we're seeing. We have, I'm pretty sure we have the highest recorded rape rates on the planet, in the world. And we have, I think, in the top 5 homicide rates, significantly worse than many war zones. So we have a real issue of bloodthirst in this country, where criminals aren't content with, if they're poor, with taking food or money or whatever, if it's inequality, with committing, let's say, white collar fraud to make a huge boatload of tens of millions of rands. Our criminals are not content with that. We have torture in this country. Every once in a while we hear another grisly story of how someone was tortured to death. And that you can never just bring back to something like inequality or destitution. You must, if you actually want to solve the problem, you must ask for more fundamental questions. You have to ask, why was this individual so predisposed to committing such a heinous act? And I think the only answer that you must arrive at is that in this person's childhood, they did not have sufficient tutelage in values. There was no one around who explained to them and who lived out the respect for human life that is necessary in a society that has many people in it. And I think that is what it's going to come down to. It's going to be they weren't taught values. And when they did bad things, their parents or their family and their community did not hold them accountable for those bad things. And therefore, it became an ingrained feature of their life. You can do bad things and there are no consequences for it. And they're not even necessarily considered bad things because they were never taught a healthy, value-based constitution in their family life. And that is what we must discover, because I don't think I cannot imagine what else could explain the bloodlust, the torturous bloodlust that we find to be so common in South Africa.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, KZN, where I come from, and the stories we hear, it's a shocker. Um, it's really, some of them is barbarism, right?
Mm.
It's very shocking, the kind of level, the levels of violent crimes we hear about, we often hear about here in South Africa. It seems to end, in my observation, Martin. I just feel like what you spoke about, the fact that we have this inequality poets collectivism, right? We've got people who keep on telling our ordinary people some theories that, well, inequality is a problem. When in fact, when you and I were to go to, whether it's a township, whether it's in rural South Africa, you find that people, they understand that, well, there are rich people, there are poor people, and they understand the concept of it. I grew up being told that you are not going to achieve much in life if you don't get educated. Now, we can debate that, because there are people who can succeed. There are those exceptions, that people can succeed without education. But that was the common belief, that study very hard. We are going to be successful. You could be a lawyer, you could be a medical doctor. These are rural townships of South Africa back then, and I'm sure even today that's the case, that you go there, people, they do have sense that to be something better in life, you need to put in the work, right? Now you have these leftist, at least in my observation, leftist activists, the elite, at now the leftist elite, who basically keep on preaching that, well, it's because of inequality. They've even went as far as saying, Martin, they keep up making a very weak argument that inequality suppresses economic growth. I was very much happy to hear Professor Larry Summers, who is very much, really, you can call him a sort of a leftist, sort of a Democrat in America. And he was saying, look, he said this a few weeks back on Bloomberg, that there isn't evidence really that supports that inequality suppresses economic growth. Whoever makes an inequality argument, it's a political argument, right? There isn't
Mm.
really evidence to back that argument that inequality suppresses growth. But let me
Yeah,
ask you about, yeah,
if I can just come in on that quickly, Pumlani,
yeah, yeah,
it's an important point. Academics and activists on the left specifically want to make that argument because they refuse to do the things that actually do spur economic growth. I mean, all the
yeah,
evidence is in. The evidence says that you have to deregulate, you have to liberalize, you have to privatize, and you have
yes,
to step out of the way as the political class,
yeah,
as the government, and then people will do things to uplift themselves economically. That's just normal human kind of society. It's just going to happen,
yeah,
and the evidence is kind of irrefutable at this stage. But you do have this sense of leftist academics and so on is looking for new reasons why we don't have economic growth. And this is one of those. Inequality suppresses economic growth. It is complete hogwash because, again, we have all the evidence from the Economic Freedom of the World annual report, the Economic Freedom of the World Index from Heritage. All these indices show that countries with free markets have more economic
yes,
activity, regardless of their
yeah.
Gini coefficient. There is no correlation there.
And our President Ramaphosa, he has I don't know if you read about this. He has appointed a G20. As you know, there's a G20 summit coming here in
Mm.
Johannesburg, and he has appointed a task force that will study global inequality. Um, and it's led, this task force, or I don't know, task team, whatever I want to call it. It's led by the famous leftist economist, long-time leftist economist. I think it's the Josh Stiglitz. Yeah, I think so. If I'm not mistaken of the name, and he has appointed this task force, this team, Martin, to understand global inequality. I mean, what's the point of that, other than to push the leftist agenda, right?
Mhm.
To use the G20 summit to push the leftist agenda,
Mhm.
right? And
Absolutely.
Ramaphosa is clearly doing that. And you can see even the themes of this G20 summit, Martin. It's sustainability, it's equity, all
they
this.
will do anything to avoid the actual issue. That is what it always comes down to. You'll never see our government appoint a task team to investigate how to expand ownership of property in South Africa, or appoint a task team to see how to deregulate the labor market or anything like that. There will always be something like, oh, we have to look at inequality or sustainable environmentalism. It's always these amorphous kind of academic concepts that they know. If they can just kind of distract on that, then they never have to do the very simple things that we know actually solve problems. And ultimately it benefits them. And then just for Maposa specifically, we just have to be clear. He is a leftist ideologue. Like, I know a lot of people in our circles, Phumlani, have this idea that, he's this well-meaning guy and he has the right ideas, but his hands are tied, or maybe he has a weak character or something. No, he believes this stuff. Cyril Ramaphosa believes this stuff. He is part of the problem. He's part of the ideology that is not only creating more poverty, but the ideology that keeps crime this massive issue in South Africa. He's a firm believer. He's a true believer.
Yeah. I interviewed someone a few years back, and we are speaking about our violent crime, and this will be our last sort of chat on this segment, and then we can move to gun rights. The gentleman was saying that part of the problem, and he thinks it's the biggest problem, it's that if you commit a violent crime in South Africa, or any serious crime, or any crime, right? He says the problem is that there are no repercussions, right? There are no consequences if you commit one, right? There's a very high chance that the system will be lenient to you, or you will get off, or you do know that you are not going to be found, right? People, they commit murder, shocking murder in broad daylight, Martin. I used to, when I was growing up, we used to see criminals on TV that would cover their faces. Today, criminals, they go into a mall and commit murder, right, without covering their faces, and then they take off. Right. How do you think of the system? Would you agree with that person that there are no repercussions in our system in South Africa when you commit, a violent crime?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So this is what the Section 12 initiative of the FMF is kind of about. It's about reforming the system to solve that problem specifically, and that's completely correct. And the reason why that is correct, I mean, a lot of people say, oh, the police don't have capacity, or the police are incompetent, and that's all correct. And the reality then is that we have to open up the capacity, and people don't like me saying this, they don't like the FMF saying this, but this means that you have to make sure that our police are focused on violent crime. Currently they aren't. I promise you they aren't. What are they doing? They are waiting around the airport to try and find people who speed. They're waiting to do random checks on people's cars coming out of the airport to combat some kind of trafficking of goods and so on. And all these things, one can make the argument, yes, these are important things, but there is an order to these things. There is a hierarchy of importance. South Africa is a de facto war zone, a complete war zone of death and destruction. And we continue to enforce these luxurious kind of laws of a peaceful society where it's, for example, it's going to be illegal soon to smoke in your own house. It would be a crime to smoke inside your own house, and that means the police can investigate you for committing that crime. We will have detectives in this country sitting at a desk being funded by the taxpayer investigating whether person X smoked in their own house, and they would need to prosecute that person. Or there's another law that says that if you film someone without their permission with your camera, you have committed a crime. Now, that is something that another detective will be focusing on. Yeah. We have tens of thousands of these kinds of crimes that need to take police resources. And even if you think, well, it's going to take 5 minutes of a detective's time, it adds up. It adds up. We do not have millions of excellent detectives in this country who can do this kind of work. So what has been our suggestion from the Free Market Foundation? You have to decriminalize at a very widespread level. You need to go into the South Africa statute book. You need to find every single criminalizing provision in our law, all of them. And you need to decide, is this important at this moment for South
At this
Africa to
moment,
solve?
yeah,
It
Gavin, yeah.
is not. We have to decriminalize that thing. Yes, you're then allowed to film people without their permission. You are allowed to operate a taxi business without a license. You are allowed to do these things that do not come up to the level of violent crime, because we need our cops and our detectives and our prosecutors and our judges to be focused on combating rape, murder, hijacking, robbery, human trafficking, all these things, all these violent crimes need to be not the top priority. They need to be the only priority in a country that has this situation in South Africa. Phumlani, our conviction rate for homicide is 15%, 15%. If you get arrested for homicide, the chances of you being convicted is 15%. I mean, think about that. 85% chance of walking.
In such a violent country, right?
There's an 8% conviction rate for rape. 8%. And only a small number of rapes are reported. So the vast majority of rapes never get reported in this country.
A lot is not
the ones that are reported makes us the rape capital of the world. And of those rapes that are reported, that tiny percentage of our rapes that are reported, only 8% are convicted. So it's in a completely impossible system. And I've said this before. It is not that our criminal justice system is collapsing. It has long ago collapsed. It's gone. There is no criminal justice system. What we have is selective enforcement. Kind of every now and then there's a big case and people are like, yippee. Yeah. It is not a drop in the bucket. So we need a very fundamental reform. And then we have at the FMF, we have spelled these reforms out at section12.org.za. And we think that if the government does this, if the government really decriminalizes, if the government develops certain aspects of our criminal justice system, if the government decentralizes to not only to municipalities and provinces the power to police, but also to communities and to businesses like private security companies, decentralize the policing power, we will actually stand a chance of denting the violent crime problem in this country. But until then, the system will remain collapsed.
Yeah, it will remain collapsed and it will be a settling situation. Now, we have 10 minutes left. 8. Let's talk about gun rights, right? There's been this assassination, a very disturbing assassination of Charlie Kirk, conservative, influential person in America. And some people are saying, well, these are haters, of course. They are saying, look, he got what he deserved because he was, pro-gun rights. I'm an advocate of gun rights myself. In fact, in my book, I do highlight that I don't believe that there should be more, a lot of gun control laws, right? Or that the government must constrain law-abiding citizens' access to guns. I don't believe in that. But there has been, people... You have many people out there who say that, Charlie got what he deserved. If you support gun rights or gun ownership, you die with a gun, well, you got what you deserve. Explain that to me.
No, it's sick, Phumlani. I mean, I think Charlie Kirk would agree with me when I say that even if someone were to come into my office right now and shoot me dead with a gun, I will remain pro-gun. Even as I'm dead, I am still pro-gun, and I think Charlie Kirk will come back from the dead and say, hey guys, just by the way, I still support everything that I said about firearms. The fact that someone might be murdered by a firearm does not invalidate the argument that he made, which was a sound one. And that is the following, and it's very simple. It's extremely simple. If someone wants to kill you or harm you, they will either get a gun, regardless of what the law says. That it doesn't matter anymore. They have already decided to murder you or to assault you or whatever. They've decided to break the law. So if the law says, hey, you're not allowed to do that, it does not matter. They will either get a gun or they will find some other way to kill you. They will stab you. They will throw you with a brick. Yeah. They will plant a bomb, and you can make bombs various different ways that the law cannot control for. So it's extremely simple. Gun control is targeted at people who are law-abiding. That is what it is. Only people who want to obey the law are affected by gun control. If you go to Japan right now, where guns are basically banned for civilians, and it's a peaceful society, sure. But the Yakuza, the organized crime in that country, has guns. I mean, they have firearms. They're not going to let the law stop them. Why? Because they're criminals. So it's extremely important to understand this. It is extremely important to also understand, because a lot of these arguments that you point out came from South Africans. They said, look, another American has been gunned down in that very gun-crazy society in the United States because they don't have gun control. And then I pointed out to these South Africans, listen, in South Africa, we have very strict gun control. We have very strict gun control in this country. You have to register and license every single firearm that you acquire. It's not a license for you as a person. You have to license every firearm. Process. You have to be registered with your local police officer, your firearms officer at your local police station. You have to go through all of this. We have very strict gun control in this country. And yet, the United States of America, with its gun culture, remains a society that is orders of magnitude safer than South Africa.
Absolutely. Thanks for pointing that out.
Kirk is assassinated.
So the data shows,
Absolutely. If you go to Southside Chicago or to Detroit, the most unsafe places in the United States, you will probably be okay. You cannot say that for the Cape Flats. You cannot say if you go there, the chances of you being gunned down are very high, much higher than even the most dangerous places in the United States. So we have strict gun control, and yet we have orders of magnitude more violent crime, gun crime even, in this country than in the United States. Why? Again, criminals do not care what your fancy law says about gun control. You are only making it more difficult for people who want to use their guns legitimately and defend themselves and their families to acquire those firearms. So that is really what it comes down to ultimately. And people who are in favor of gun rights, of more of a firearm owning society like I am, like you are, like Charlie Kirk was, we understand this. We understand that just applying these laws and saying we're going to take guns off the streets changes virtually nothing. Really, it changes virtually nothing. And instead, what we at the FMF also encourage is we need a far larger amount of gun-owning South Africans who own their firearms responsibly and use their firearms responsibly, because that does actually create doubt in the minds of criminals. Because if they don't know whether their next victim is going to shoot them, that changes things significantly. Currently, as you've pointed out, our criminals know they won't get caught, and they're pretty sure that the people that they target, especially in our crime hotspots, in townships, they know that their victims are not armed. They know that. So we need to change that equation completely. We need to make sure millions more South Africans become firearm owners, become trained and responsible firearm owners, so that criminals start thinking maybe twice about taking that step and ending that person's life. Because the criminal is going to have a gun. He is going to have a gun regardless of the law. We need to make sure we have to even those scales. There's nothing more. We spoke about inequality. There's nothing that evens the scales more than a firearm.
Those are powerful points, Martin. So as we close off, just one thing to highlight. I've had a firearm here in Johannesburg pointed my way, I think 3 times, right? Yet I'm still in favor, in support of gun rights, right? Law-abiding citizens should have access to guns. And I guess what you are saying here in 1 minute, your response, we are saying that we should relax the gun laws that we have in South Africa at the moment. That's what you are saying.
Absolutely. Absolutely, laws, yeah. I would say we need to repeal most of the gun laws that we have in South Africa. Yeah, and the best idea that really, if you still want there to be some system in place, is you have to license the person, register the firearm, a once-off thing, and there we go. And you have the right to defend yourself with your firearm. Reduce the bureaucracy, make it easier for responsible people to acquire firearms and defend themselves and their families.
Yes, and I think that's I can't disagree with that. I think it's something that we need to get right, especially in a country that's where we really feel unsafe. You know, we do feel unsafe in this country. Mr. van Staden, wonderful to talk to you, sir. Martin is the head of policy at the Free Market Foundation. So I guess people can check your website, freemarketfoundation.com, to learn about your work. And where can they find you as well?
Yes, thanks, Phumlani. The great discussion. So yeah, please go to freemarketfoundation.com. My own work you can find at martinvanstaden.com. And please, you can follow me on Twitter or on X if you found this discussion interesting. That's at Martin_ASFL. And you'll find these kinds of sentiments shared there very often. Thanks, Phumlani.
Fantastic. It's Phumlani Majozi. This is the Phumlani Majozi Show. We'll chat soon. You enjoyed this conversation? Well, if you did, do subscribe to this show, the Phumlani Majozi Show on Public Policy. Remember to also follow me on X at Phumlani M. Majozi. I'm also on LinkedIn, Phumlani M. Majozi. I'm on Instagram as well, at Phumlani M. Majozi. I'm also on Facebook, Phumlani M. Majozi. That's my Facebook page. I'm also on TikTok at Phumlani M. Majozi. If you have any recommendations or thoughts about this show, do email me, majozimedia@gmail.com. Yes, majozimedia@gmail.com.